Hello and welcome to Conscious TV. My name is Renate McNay and my guest today is Joan Tollifson. Hello, Joan.
Hi, Renate.
Joan wrote 4 books and I'm going to show you the titles. One is Nothing to Grasp, Bare Bones Meditation, Waking Up from the Story of Myself.
My life.
Oh, sorry.
Same thing.
My life is the same thing. Okay. Awake in the Heartland and Painting the Sidewalk with Water, which is a wonderful title. And I like to know how this title came about.
Well, when I was a little girl,
Yes.
my mother would give me a pail of water and a paintbrush so that I could paint the sidewalk.
Yeah.
And I would just enjoy painting the sidewalk. And then years later, I was an art major, and I was suddenly concerned about how I compared to other great artists, and, or I should say, to great artists, and you know, whether my paintings would sell and all these kinds of things that you learn to be concerned about. And so the title kind of refers to that state of being of the child, that childlike state where you're just enjoying the gestures and the shapes and the pure, just the event of painting the sidewalk with water, and it doesn't matter whether it evaporates and doesn't last.
Yes.
And I did the cover painting, actually. I painted the sidewalk with water for the first time since childhood to make the cover photo.
It's beautiful. Well, anyway, Joan, those 4 books are the most wonderful books. One of the most wonderful books I read.
Thank you.
I was deeply moved by them because you talk about your own experience with life, and it's such a beautiful dance between the absolute and the relative. And you give great pointers to something which is so difficult to grasp. And that's my first question. Why is it so difficult to grasp? We have all these books, all these teachers, and yet it's incredibly difficult to wake up.
Because it's so simple. I mean, that's the problem, really. It's so simple. Because what's being pointed to, I mean, you hear that, like I can remember my first Zen teacher saying, this is it. And then the mind says, this can't be it. This is a big mess. And the mind thinks that we're looking for something out there. We're looking for some big experience. We're looking for some... And of course, you hear all these awakening stories, enlightenment stories, and there's all these words floating around like liberation and enlightenment. So the mind is always looking for something out there. It's looking for an experience or some kind of mental understanding, some event, something that's going to be out there, and it wants to grasp this. It, you know, like it hears these words like consciousness or awareness or reality or your true nature, and it wants to get hold of what that is. It wants to grasp it. And it can't do it because what's being pointed to is this happening, this I like to call it this seeing, breathing, listening, awareing being right here, right now. And it can't be grasped. What is this? We can come up with labels and stories from various disciplines, but we really have no way of, I mean, this just is as it is. And it's just the beingness of it, the isness of it, the presentness of it is something that is completely obvious. There's no way to avoid it. It can't be attained because it's right here. It's already all there is. But the mind will say, well, what is she talking about? And then tries to get it, you know, like it's something that you're going to get, some kind of object. And
I know it was for me, for myself, the most confusing thing if somebody said, this is it. And I said, what does that mean, this is it? There isn't anything. What does that mean? You know, it just
It's just, you know, different pointers work for different people, but,
Yeah.
but to me, this is it, is just pointing to the immediacy, the presentness, right here, right now, which is ever-changing.
Yeah.
It's, you can't get hold of it. There's nothing outside of it to get hold of it. There's nothing to get hold of. And yet, it's not something mysterious. It's this event, this happening, this hearing, seeing, breathing, being is inescapable, unavoidable, obvious. It's never missing.
It's just it.
Right. But then with the mind says, but what is it? What is this?
Yeah.
And then it's, again, trying to grasp something.
Yeah.
And we get these words like awareness, and then we start, what is awareness? And we're like trying to get that or trying to identify as that. And instead of just seeing that awareness is, it's just a word for this knowingness of being here, this seeing. There's a something that's, not something, but there's a seeing of everything that's happening, an awaring of everything that's happening. That's just happening by itself. You can't not be aware. It's here right now. It's what here now is, really.
Yes.
And so it's not something to attain. It's just waking up to what's already here.
Yes, and there is one day, there is the understanding. You know, one day you understand, okay, it's awareness. But then, somehow this realization, I feel, at one point, needs to drop deeper into an experience or into the body. Would you say so?
Well,
sometimes somehow I feel understanding alone is not enough.
No, but we're not talking about understanding in an intellectual sense or an analytical sense or a conceptual sense.
Yeah.
Though that may be a piece of it, but we're really, I mean, this present moment isn't an idea. Mm. I mean, once we have a word like the present moment, then of course it becomes an idea. Mm-hmm. But I mean, just the bare isness of this, you know, this color red is not the word red maybe is an idea, but just the color itself, the seeing itself, the sound of this voice, the listening, the breathing, without the words, without the labels, just the isness of this is not an idea or a belief or an understanding. It's not something you have to understand. It's just what's here. You know, all our confusion is in the conceptualization and the thinking. I like to say that this is about, somebody said this, I don't know who started it, but the map is not the territory. Mm-hmm. And it's such a wonderful pointer because our confusion is all in the map. It's all in how we think about it. But this is not confusing. And just this, hearing my voice is not confusing. No. You know, seeing the red, just seeing red, seeing color, just breathing, that's not confusing. Mm-hmm. It's only confusing when we start to think, but what is it? Or am I awake yet? And there is, you could say there's a deepening in the sense that I feel like, you know, we keep, in a way, getting the same lessons over and over. At least that's my feeling. We kind of learn these same basic lessons over and over, every time in a deeper or subtler way, maybe. Mm-hmm. So there is, in a sense, a deepening, but that can be very misleading because really, you can't go any deeper than right here, right now. I mean, this is it.
Yeah, it is obvious.
Yeah, it is, isn't it?
It is, yeah. Sometimes it is, sometimes not.
Well, and if we're referencing it to an experience, see, that's the other thing that the mind tends to do, is, you know, we have a kind of experience sometimes in meditation or just any old time, or listening to reading a book or hearing a teacher or something. We have some experience of kind of clarity and spaciousness. And then we think, that's it. And what I need to do is be having that experience all the time.
Yes.
And that
yes.
would be, you know, enlightenment or whatever.
Yes.
But no
right.
experience is going to last all the time,
Yes,
because by
yes.
definition, experience is ever changing. So
Yes.
any experience is going to come and go.
Yes. So how did you come to this understanding, Joan? What happened to you that you saw the nature of reality? Was that one experience? Was that a series of experience? Was there no experience?
Well, the funny thing is, you know, in really waking up, you just see that it's never been absent. You're waking up to what's...
But what helped you to wake up?
Well, I mean, as a child, I was into visual. I was a very visual person. I was into art a lot, and I think artists often have a sense of this, just because you're not so much in the conceptual world, but you're in the visual world, and you see that the sky appears in a puddle on the sidewalk, and so you kind of and you see how everything moves and changes, and so I think that was maybe a beginning. And then when I was in college in the 60s, I took a class on Vedanta and Zen and started sitting with a little Zen group and read Alan Watts and various people, and that kind of planted a seed, because I kind of got it but didn't get it. I kind of, you know, it resenated, but it felt like I have no idea what these people are talking about, but I kind of do know, because intuitively we all do know, because it's pointing to something so obvious that we do know. So and then I kind of went off into being a drunk for a while and kind of got off the. But then when that ended,
well, I have to tell you, you had a pretty wild life.
Yeah, for a while. It's gotten more and more.
I have to read out.
Sedate.
You were not only an alcoholic. You took drugs. You were a communist, a revolutionary, a rebellious, a political and disability right activist, and you've stormed with a group of disabled people the San Francisco's Federal Building.
Well, we didn't storm it, we occupied it for a month.
Well, that's that too. And you occupied that building for a whole month, which was the longest occupation in the US history. That's quite something.
As far as I know. I don't want to... But, yeah.
But that, you know, that somehow shows you were unhappy with the world outside. You wanted to change the world outside, which probably started in here with an unhappiness inside you. Yeah,
I mean, you could say that addiction is really, I think, a kind of metaphor for the human condition, whether you don't necessarily have to be addicted to alcohol and drugs, but there's that basic sense of dissatisfaction and seeking and looking for something that will get us high, whether it's spirituality or alcohol or that will numb us out and take care of our pain, whatever, pain relief, is a really deep human tendency. And so yeah, there was a deep unhappiness that, and then the political. I mean, I wasn't drunk during the political. That was a sort of separate thing. But after I sobered up, I got very politically engaged in the women's movement and the gay liberation movement and the disability rights movement and the anti-imperialist movement and I still have a big interest in politics and in the world, and I still care about it. So that hasn't gone away. I don't go to political demonstrations anymore, or I'm not an activist anymore, but I still care. And do you know why would you share with us why you were so unhappy? Because I was reading
you actually had a very beautiful upbringing, and you were really loved by your parents.
Mm-hmm.
And your parents were deeply in love with themselves too.
With each other.
Yeah, yeah. With each other.
And with themselves, maybe.
And you were born with just half an arm.
Mm-hmm.
Was this the source of your unhappiness?
Well, you know, anything I say in response to that is going to be a story, because we don't really know why anything is happening the way it is. You know, the mind can sort of go back and pluck out certain memories and come up with a story. I think that unhappiness is a pretty basic human thing, whether you are growing up in a happy family or a abusive family, whether you're growing up with money or with poverty, whether you're growing up in a war zone or in peace. I think that dissatisfaction, that restlessness that we find kind of at the center of things often, is a very common human, it's our common human experience. So I don't think you really actually need any special thing to bring it on.
Yeah.
But yeah.
You were looking for happiness, I guess. So you went through all these different things of alcohol and drugs, and I guess you couldn't find happiness in all that.
No, alcohol and drugs definitely does not bring happiness. It may bring a temporary happiness, but it's then you have the hangover and the disaster that your life has become. And, but I learned a lot from being a drunk, actually. I mean, it took me to a lot of places I would never have gone to otherwise.
Such as?
Well, just, I mean, I did things that I would never do sober. And so I learned a lot. And basically, I think addiction, maybe the main thing I learned from addiction and also this finger biting compulsion that I've had all my life, which I still have, it still flares up sometimes. What I really learned from that is that there is no one here who's in control of these things, and it seems like there is when we make a choice, and then we supposedly make a choice, and then the result is what we chose. Then it seems like, well, I did that, but when we kind of just ignore all the times it doesn't go that way.
No,
but
sorry, to interrupt. That's something interesting I would like to explore more with you, because several people say something different. Some say there isn't anybody here who can change something, and other people say when you woke up to who you are, then the real work starts. Then you have to clear up the whole world. Now, I am personally in a teaching. I'm in the with Ian as well in the diamond approach.
I've heard of it, but I never have done it.
So we are in this school since probably 20 years, and this is something our teacher says. You know, to wake up is the easy part. But then, to clear the whole world up, or clear yourself up, that is the long, difficult path. So what is your take on that?
Well, see, I would say waking up is not an event that happens to someone. It's seeing through that whole story that there's someone who's going to be awake or not awake. And it seems to be the nature of life that it's always working at clearing things up. I mean, if you just look on the level of the body, there's disease, and then there's the white blood cells doing their work of cleansing, and it seems to be just part of nature, part of our nature, that there's a natural kind of curiosity and interest and in clearing things up.
Yeah.
So there is this kind of, you could say, work that goes on, and it takes various forms. Different people get interested in different things. Some people are interested, like Martin Luther King was interested in clearing up racial oppression. And other people are interested in working on a much more inner level, clearing up something through the diamond approach or whatever, and some people go into psychotherapy and they're clearing up whatever, you know, there's all kinds of different approaches or ways, and you know, people get into a lot of wars over these pointers like no choice or no self or choice or you know, and I think it's important to see that they're words, that they're conceptual descriptions, they're maps, and the territory itself cannot ever be really. A map is only going to be a description or an abstraction of the territory. So this is not confusing. But once we start trying to figure out, am I doing this by free will, or is this happening because the whole universe is doing this at this moment, and who's doing this, and how is it happening, and you know, as soon as we start trying to figure all that out, we're in the map world. And there are different maps. You know, if you're training for the Olympics, you're not going to use a map that says there's no you and there's no choice, and you know, whether you can jump over that hurdle or not, we'll just see. You know, you're going to use a map that points to you can do it, and this is how you want to move. You notice how you're moving your legs. But in exploring the nature of reality, to me, the map that points to the absence of anyone at the helm feels more descriptive of my own actual, what I see, and that did come in part from seeing how certain things just couldn't be controlled, and it also came from really watching very closely as very simple decisions were made, like whether to get up after sitting down for a while. And just really watching, where did that decision, how did that unfold? And I saw, I don't really know how it unfolded, you know.
I understand. I do that sometimes myself. I have this thought, I should go and do that and that. And then but I don't get up. I just sit and wait. And all of a sudden the impulse comes and I go and do
you're
it.
Getting up. Yeah.
And there isn't a feeling that I did that.
Because the you know, what we think of as the I, when we think there's this self in here that we think is the, you know, the thinker of my thoughts, the observer of my life, the doer of my deeds, the author of my decisions, the maker of my decisions. But when we really look to see and to find that self, there's nothing there. There's simply this whole happening. There's just this. And these words are coming out, but I can't find anyone back there who's speaking them or authoring them. They're emerging.
But the one who might be back there is consciousness itself.
Well,
it's not an individual. Is it not that we can say it's consciousness just playing this game with itself?
We can say that, but that's another map. I mean, because consciousness is a word, and this awareness is a word, and totality is a word. Any of these things, they're maps, but our actual experience right now is that there is this, excuse me, I've got something in my throat I'm having a hard time with. Sorry. Anyway, there just is.
So this understanding, Joan, I mean, came to you over time, I guess.
Well, again, it's hard to say because it feels like it's timeless in the sense that it's now. It's just, you know, it takes, in order to say, well, it unfolded in time or it happened suddenly, we have to go into the world of memory and thought and imagination, and then we can say, you know, that this happened slowly or it happened suddenly. Or
and what impact did this seeing have or had on your life?
Well, again,
did something change?
That would be a story. Because
it's okay, we like stories. I mean, isn't the whole universe a story, beginning from the Big Bang?
Well, once we start talking about it and thinking about it, it's a story, yeah. But
Yeah.
just right here, there's no story in just this immediacy till we start talking about it and thinking about it. But
isn't the story part of life? Isn't
Yeah.
the story part of raising children? I'm thinking about my grandchildren. You know, without me, you know, I'm telling them fairy stories so they can, you know, identify and you know, develop their fantasy. I mean, it's part of our human existence, the story.
yes, absolutely, it's part of life.
Yeah.
So it's not, I'm not anti-story.
Yes.
It's just seeing that all our confusion is in the map or in the story. It's not in the immediacy of life itself. So
If we take the story serious, that's true.
yeah, I mean, if I, so it's one thing to have a story, like I can tell you the story of how I grew up in this and that situation, and then I was, you know, a drunk, and I studied Buddhism, and I went to the Zen Center, and I can tell you that story, but, and it may be relatively true, you know, but it's a story.
Yeah.
It's a tremendous abstraction of what actually happened, and it's a putting it into a kind of narrative or a concept, and it's just to see that and to see that it is a story is very liberating. I mean, I can still have the story, and it can
Yeah.
still have its functional usefulness or its
Yeah.
enjoyment or whatever, but to see that really I can't find the entity who's supposedly at the center of that story. I can't really find Joan as anything that is sort of separate from the rest of life and persisting over time, and all I can find is this here now, this happening.
So then, what's happening now? What is your experience now?
Nothing extraordinary, except in the sense that everything is extraordinary.
Yeah. So, but then there is nothing to talk about.
Yes, right. It's kind of a career stopper.
Yes.
No, I mean, we can still talk, but
It's, for example, I just remember a saying Jesus actually said, be a man in the world, but not of it. So that means, yeah, in my translation, go into this story, live this life, but also realize this is not all who you are. So I'm I'm still trying to hang on story here. Sorry.
well, our suffering is mistaking, is believing that we are this kind of encapsulated unit of consciousness that's looking out at the world out there and trying to survive as this unit, as this separate somebody.
Yeah.
That's our suffering right there.
Yes.
And liberation is simply recognizing what's actually very obvious when you tune into experiencing rather than thinking, which is that there is simply this whole seamless, undivided happening that's always right here, right now. And in that, there's no suffering. There may be pain or painful circumstances, but there's no suffering in the way that we suffer when we're in the story, when we become sort of entranced by the story. So,
but wouldn't you say that people can understand that, and yet their habitual self is in the way to realize this flow of life.
well, the self is, the habitual self is, it is just a habit, it's a mirage, it's a kind of mirage. And that mirage never it may continue to appear, but in seeing that it's just a mirage, it gets sort of less and less believable, you could say. And
But when you are in it, You know, when you are in the middle of suffering or despair, then this is your world. There is no way you can get in and say to this person, listen, this is just a mirage what you experience. And he doesn't know how to feed his children the next day. What do you do then? How do you get in? How do you help somebody?
I don't know that there's an answer to that. I mean, it seems like life is unfolding itself in its own way.
Yeah.
So, you know, for example, I couldn't have planned how I was going to get out of drinking. It just kind of, amazingly, I met somebody who became my therapist quite accidentally. As a child, I certainly didn't plan to get into Buddhism or non-duality. It all kind of unfolded. And so, and some people die on the street of being a drunk. I mean, you know, that's part of life too, that but you see, it's all one seamless whole. It's like we are the whole thing. We are the drunk on the street, and we are Ramana Maharshi. We are the whole show. And so it really isn't personal in that way. And that sense of self appears sometimes, and there can be, I mean, speaking personally, there can be, you know, there can be moments, moments of anxiety or depression or defensiveness or anger or all kinds of things that have to do with, I would say, with that kind of mirage being mistaken for reality for a moment. You could say, well, maybe it's never totally believable anymore, but see, I don't really like this whole idea of awakened people who are just sort of in some other realm, because that feels to me completely contradictory to what I see as awakening, which is really recognizing that there is no persisting person, there is no encapsulated somebody, there is simply this seamless happening in which everything is arising. And I often use the example of weather. There are different weather systems, like different cities have different weather, and different individual body-mind organisms have different weather. And some people are more prone to depression for whatever reason than other people, or more prone to anger, or more prone to... Some people are just kind of naturally easygoing and happy. But, you know, it's so... none of it is really personal. And
you were quite a dedicated meditator.
yes,
You spent a lot of years meditating, and Toni Packer became at one point your teacher. And I was reading in your book, you had quite a desperate time also when you were with her, and she, you know, gave you all the time pointers and tried to get you out of there or help you. Yeah. Was that, looking back, was that helpful for you?
yes, although again, of course, that's a story again.
Yeah.
It presumes that there's this sort of time
But
and me.
at the time, you were in this place. You were there. There wasn't a realization that this was a story.
Well, there was.
It was real for you. Certain things, I mean, the way I read it, seemed to be very real. Your depression seemed to be very real. Your thoughts seemed to be very real.
Well, there was, you know, there's the seeing of a thought is already outside the thought, you could say, or in other words, if you see a thought like I've ruined my whole life as a thought, if in the seeing of that there's already a freedom from it, even if there's still a way in which it's partly believable. And so I think the stories that they were sort of revealing themselves. They're still revealing themselves. They're always revealing. It's a never-ending revelation.
Yeah. But do you still suffer?
Sometimes there's still suffering.
And you talk about the functional and the dysfunctional Joan. Do you do something about the dysfunctional Joan?
Yeah, I mean, I've done many different things over the years. You know, I did therapy at one point, and, you know,
But would you still do that? Or
Yeah,
would you just leave it as I am dysfunctional?
And just to be clear, I mean, I do use those words, functional and dysfunctional, but I use them cautiously because, you know, they're very dualistic. But,
yes. Yeah.
But, well, for example, my finger biting I would say it's dysfunctional in the sense that you know, it's very contracted experience, and when of course, because I have only one hand, I can't really do much else when I'm doing it.
Yeah.
And it can use up time and energy. So in that sense, it's dysfunctional. But it's also been functional in a funny way because it's revealed things to me about how life works that I might not have seen in any other way. Because if I hadn't had that, and I had just sobered up in the way that I sobered up, I would have thought, well, because my therapist that I sobered up with presented it as a choice, and I'd made the choice to sober up. And so then I made the choice to stop smoking cigarettes, and I would have sort of thought, well, anybody can choose this because I did, if I hadn't had this finger biting compulsion, which I couldn't seem to not do. So you could say it's dysfunctional, but it also has had this function of revealing certain things, and it's given me a tremendous compassion for people who maybe are child molesters or something, because I can see from my own experience how one can be caught up in things that one might even wish one weren't doing, but can't not do. So, so is it functional or dysfunctional? You can't really say. Do I do something about it? Well, I've talked about it in the past with all my spiritual teachers. I mean, I worked on it in therapy with a couple therapists. You know, so I've done body work and all kinds of things that might have helped. And it has gotten better over the years. I mean, I do it less often, less severely. It still happens, though. I mean...
Is there a desire in you to stop it?
Well, yes and no. I mean, it would be really nice if it went away forever. Mm-hmm. I'd really like that. But there used to be a kind of feeling like I really took it personally, and I felt like this was an indicator of how screwed up and neurotic I was, and what a failure I was at you know, being in the now and everything else, and you know, so I gave it meaning, and I took it personally, and I really felt like I needed to get rid of this. Now there's a kind of at peaceness with it, like a feeling like, if this falls away permanently, that will be a wonderful blessing, and that will make me very happy. But if it doesn't, if I'm doing this to the day I die, that's okay. That's okay.
So in the moment, your hand comes up and you want to bite your fingers. What you say is, you do not have the choice. Also, you are completely present, and it's happening within your awareness. You do not have the choice to stop it.
Well, it's very interesting. I mean, because when I'm doing it, there's a kind of, it has a very, it's a very compulsive kind of thing. Like you just suddenly feel like there's this uneasiness or something in the body that you have to do this. And various people have given me all sorts of possible explanations for what that could be. Mm-hmm. Everything from psychological stories to neurochemical things to, you know, things having to do with amputation in the brain and all kinds of things. But so who knows why that arises? But there is this thing that arises, and then sometimes there can just be an immediate sort of seeing I don't want to go on with this and not doing it. Mm-hmm. But I notice that that doesn't always seem possible. Sometimes mm-hmm. it just goes on. And then sometimes there's a kind of complete acceptance of it and being completely aware of it. And when that happens, just this complete attention to it and complete awareness of it and complete acceptance of it, no desire to change it, no doing this because it might work or something like that, but just completely being with it. At that moment, it always stops. Yeah. Now, it may start up again a second later, but at that moment, it always stops. But if I try to do that to make it stop, that's a completely different thing. So that doesn't work. That. Yeah. And whether that happens in any given moment or not, it's become very clear to me there's no controlling that. It happens or it doesn't. And my main teacher, Toni Packer, she had a wonderful way of kind of pointing to that, because she really saw that it wasn't a choice that one could just decide not to do this anymore. But she also was encouraging or inviting me or anyone to give attention to it. So she gave me sort of instructions, but she didn't present them as instructions. She presented them as kind of a question, like, is it possible when that urge comes, just not to go with the biting, but just to feel the urge in the body? Is it possible to do that? And she knew sometimes it will be and sometimes it won't be. And then as it's happening, she said, is it possible just to give it attention in the same way you would attend to, you know, your dearest friend? Is it possible just to feel the sensations in your teeth and in your fingers and in your shoulder and in your belly as this is happening, and just be completely aware of it with no judgment, no effort to stop it, no story about it, just really paying attention to it? Is that possible? And she knew sometimes that is possible and sometimes it isn't. But it was a kind of invitation, a question. And sometimes that happens. And when that happens, then in that moment, I've noticed, it stops. And so again, you know, is there choice or is there no choice? It's kind of a map. And when teachers presented it, when teachers use the map that says you always have a choice, you can choose, you create your reality, you can choose what you do, and you can choose where you what you pay attention to. I find that very untruthful, and I feel like it sets people up for self-hatred and shame and guilt and blame, because other people aren't doing it very well either. Yes. And if people use the pointer that there's no choice and stick to that very dogmatically, that feels untrue to me in some way also, because you know, you can't really say whether that's a choice or whether that's just what the universe is doing in this moment. Yeah. Anything you say is going to be a map. So they're kind of, I like the way Toni approached it. She approached it as kind of a question, as a possibility, just something to investigate, like, is it possible to bring attention to this? Not bring attention to this, and if you can't or you don't, you're a failure, you know, not that kind of attitude. And not coming with some dogma like, there's no you there, so there's nothing to do because, but just an invitation, is it possible? And there's also just kind of a seeing that this event is just one of the events of life, and life has events that are unpleasant. I mean, in nature, there are all kinds of things going on, volcanoes and hurricanes, and it isn't all open and spacious and pleasant. There's also contraction and suffering and things eating each other, and so it's also seeing that our weather, that you know, awakening is not about some sort of me finally having perpetual sunshine, which is kind of how we think about it.
Yeah, but as long as we have the feeling that there is a me, and a lot of people, even when they realize, they have the realization that they are not a me, that doesn't mean the me disappears. And so I completely understand, and I do have, because of my own experience, this flow, this choiceless flow you're talking about is only happening if there is no self. And there is also no question, do I have a choice or not a choice? Because there is no self-reflection. It's just you are in a flow. You're just life. But as long as there is the sense that you exist, there is somebody in there who thinks you exist, you think you have a choice, even that's not true.
Well, you may or you may not.
You just cannot live. I mean, can you live? How do you make decisions? How do you live your life?
They happen. I mean, there may be, like, okay, I had this invitation to come to London, and then, so that there are back and forth thoughts that arise. Yes, go, that would be fun, blah, 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 and then other thoughts, no, it's a long trip, it's a long flight, your energy won't hold up very well, you should just stay home. No, go, it'll be wonderful, you could do this and this and this, it'll be great. No, don't go, it'll be da-da-da. And those back and forth thoughts arise, and then eventually I find myself on the internet booking a ticket. And I can't really say where the, having observed this many times with the simple decisions and the big decisions, I can't really find anyone making that decision. It's just, or even thinking those thoughts. Those thoughts are simply popping up. Do this, don't do this. So I think people really mystify this no self thing, it's like it's some big thing that's going to happen where the self falls away or something. But in just tuning into the simple experiencing that's right here, right now, there's no self until a thought comes up, a self-referencing thought like, I shouldn't have said that, or whatever.
Yes.
then that thought kind of creates the mirage of this imaginary self. But until that thought, there's simply hearing, seeing, breathing, speaking, thinking, the attention moving here, there, the other place. It's all happening. And there's a functional sense of location or identity with the body that you need to survive. I mean, without it, you wouldn't know whose name to answer to, or how to cut a carrot without chopping off your finger or anything. I mean, you need that basic kind of, but that's functional and it's there when it's needed. That's not the sense of self that creates our suffering. The sense of self that creates our suffering is that mirage that comes up with thoughts like, I shouldn't have said that, or I'm not enlightened yet, or I am enlightened, wow, or
Yeah, the ego structure.
Yeah, that's what we call, some people call the ego or something. Yeah. And it's just a mirage. It's never really there. So it's not like there's actually a self to get rid of. It's just seeing through this habitual, conditioned pattern. And it doesn't really matter whether it falls away in one big, I don't really think it falls away completely for anyone in one big flash. I mean, some people do maybe have big transformations, but even then, I bet they still have moments of feeling defensive or feeling irritated or something, and maybe they won't describe that as the self. But to me, that would be it comes up again. Yeah. And it doesn't, to compare, well, let's see, it's fallen away 99.9% of the time for Eckhart Tolle, and only, 50% of the time for this person, and only 2% of the time for me, or, those kinds of things. Those thoughts are all based on the mirage. Those thoughts are all referencing this mirage, you know, the whole concern with, you know, this picture of me going back and forth between clarity and confusion, and me who sometimes sees it and sometimes doesn't. It's all about the imaginary me. It's just thoughts about the imaginary me.
Well, what are we going to do about that? What's the answer, Joan?
Well,
what's the answer to that? You know, how can we not disidentify with the mirage?
It's happening by itself. I mean,
so
you know,
there's nothing
like you
to
didn't
do.
just decide when you were a little girl that you were going to grow up and do conscious TV. It's that you were going to. It's just, or
No,
that you
I
were
haven't
going
a
to.
clue how I ended up sitting here.
Or how you were going to grow up and get into the diamond heart work or anything. I mean, it's all naturally unfolded, right?
Yeah.
So it's like life is doing it itself. I mean, it's not like we're not there's no me in here who's managing this whole thing. There never has been. And you know, we don't have to manage the whole thing. It's happening quite naturally, isn't it? I mean, that's our actual experience, that it's happening quite naturally. I mean, all of a sudden we just stumble upon something. Like
sometimes I put so much effort in certain things, and I feel I really have to effort
yeah. Well, that's
to get this or that happening.
And that's our suffering, you know, and that comes up, you know, and like if I'm thinking about whether to go to London and it sort of seems very serious, like I really have to get the right answer here, because if I don't, I could screw up my whole life or something. You know, that's
you never know, you might.
But I mean, there's no way to really screw up your life. I mean, that's the truth.
On one level, that's true, yeah.
No, there really isn't. And so it's like, but those, you know, that kind of sense of I have to solve this problem. Or, you know, I mean, I have my opinions about who I want to win a presidential election, and I can feel quite strongly about it. But if it gets to sort of feeling like, if they don't win, the whole world's going to be in a disaster, or the universe, you know, that's suffering, and that's really not true, because somewhere in us we all know that even if the whole world blows up, as it eventually will, everything is okay. We know that. We all know that in some way.
So there's nothing to do.
Well, or there's everything to do. There's, you know, whatever.
You just live your life.
Yeah, you don't have a choice, really.
Yeah.
I mean, these words are coming out, and
yeah. And I know you said something very beautiful. Your biggest relief was when you understood that there is nowhere to go and nothing to become.
Sounds good. People quote me sometimes. Oh, that's nice.
You are in the process of writing a book on aging and death. What can you give us a hint what you are going to say?
Well,
and the end of self-improvement.
Well, it's tentatively titled Death, the End of Self-Improvement. And it's, well, I just, as I get older, I notice that there is more, well, I am getting old, so there's that experience. And then there's seeing more people dying. I mean, I went through my mother's death and various friends' death, and recently my first lover died, and so, you know, various people dying. And so it's kind of just what's up for me right now, and I'm writing about it. And but it's very interesting that, well, getting older seems to be a kind of embodiment of the spiritual journey, because it's really all about losing control, losing self, you know, you loss of one thing after another. You lose control, you lose your self-image, you lose your friends,
lose your brain.
You lose your brain, you lose everything you think of as you, kind of. You lose. So it's a very interesting journey, and to be with someone who's dying, you often see them. I mean, they literally, you know, my first lover who died recently. I mean, she lost. At the end, she couldn't swallow. She couldn't move. She couldn't talk. And this was somebody who had been a high-level athlete, and so it's a giving up. And death, of course, is the great kind of boogeyman that we're so terrified of. But when in really seeing that there is only this seamless wholeness, there's nobody to die. There's no one, you can't find where anything begins or ends, because it's all movement, it's all one whole happening. And so the fear of death is sort of like the fear people used to have of stepping off the edge of the earth, because they thought it was flat. It's like it's based on a false idea. And but it is kind of, you know, the ultimate letting go, which we do every night when we go to sleep. So it's really nothing extraordinary. But so that's all kind of what I'm writing about now.
Wow. When is it coming out?
Well, we don't know. You know, it's however long it takes. We have to see. The universe is writing it, you know.
Okay. Well, looking at the clock, we have to finish. Went faster the time.
We've reached the 8.
We reached the 8, yes. I'm just showing again your books, Painting the Sidewalk with Water, Awake in the Heartland, and Bare Bones Meditation, Waking Up from the Story of My Life. And her latest book is Nothing to Grasp. And I really, really enjoyed all 4 of books. You're a wonderful writer.
Thank you, Renate.
Okay, well, thank you for being with us, Joan.
Thank you, it's been great being here.
Yeah, and thank you for watching Conscious TV, and we see you again soon. Bye-bye.